Godfather. Pulled up to the scene in a 65 Bentley, dripped in Brioni, China doll with me, looking like a supermodel. Oh, what a feeling. 25 years old, 25 million. Today's the audition for the Godfather part. My life's already a movie, so when do I start? I walk up in Patsy's, East 119th Street. Fat Tony Salerno gets a kiss on the cheek. I know my way around, not my first time here. Been doing overnight cigarette loans for 10 years. I say hello to Danny Pagano and Tough Tony. Nicky Domino gives me a nod, they all know me. They ask why I'm there so early, I say the part. They say what part? I say the movie, why not? I don't look like Carlo, they all begin laughing. 3 p.m. ready for the lights, cameras, action. Gianni getting his own.
My name is Gianni Russo, a.k.a. Carlo, the infamous son-in-law from The Godfather. I'm now known as the Hollywood Godfather, and this is my story.
Walking with a limp like will I ever run? Once again, or is this it? Am I forever done? Living in the hospital was never fun. Some people were cool, but not everyone.
Welcome, everybody. It's time for another Hollywood Godfather podcast. And I'll introduce the lady first because I was brought up right. Julia, our co-host, how are you?
I'm very good, thank you.
And my partner in crime and many other things, Pat Picciarelli.
Good evening or good afternoon, wherever you are. Okay, Julia, tell us what we're going to do today, because we have no idea.
Yeah, definitely. So today's show is about a gangster who grew up in Harlem, who, by the young age of 15, was involved in crimes such as larceny, assault, and armed robbery. So after many stints in jail, he continued to climb the ladder of authority among the gangsters in New York and took care of anyone who would defy him. He was Joseph Bonanno's advisor and eventually tried to take over the Bonanno crime family from the recognized boss Rastelli. And he even bombed Frank Costello's tomb when he died just to send a message. So today's show is about Carmine Galante. What
a pleasant fellow.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
and, the funniest thing, I'm the only one out of the three of us that had met him.
I was very close to it. I had mentioned,
but he was dead when you met him.
No. Well, that was the second time I met him.
Oh,
but no, I used to hang out at a place that I've mentioned in other podcasts. A place called the Beef East. It's a bar by the entrance to the Queens Midtown Tunnel on the Manhattan side. Lilo had a few families. And he lived with his mistress, that family. He also had children with her on 33rd Street, which was at a block and a half away from the bar. And I saw him twice over the course of years. And he was always surrounded by bodyguards. He was not a very well-liked guy. We'll get to his past in a minute. But this was truly a scary guy. I mean, he was small, and he was as tall as he was wide. So the guy's about 5'5". And heavy, and he had these black eyes. I mean, he walked out of, it was an apartment, I believe, on the north side of 33rd Street. And I happened to be walking up the block going somewhere or staggering to my car, whatever it was. And he just glanced at me as people will glance at each other. I looked at him, he looked at me, and these fearsome, dead eyes. I said, here's a guy, I didn't know who he was at the time. And I said, here's a guy that I don't want to be acquainted with. And he struck fear into everybody. But
O'Neill had those eyes too. There's a lot.
Yeah, well, I never had the pleasure of meeting him in person. You were a good friend of his, but I mean, Galante was a certified. This is one of his claims to fame, I suppose. A certified psycho. When he was in prison for the first time, in the intake process, those of you who've never been in prison, I hope you never go. But during the intake process, depending on what prison you're in, it could take up to 30 days. And they run you through a battery of tests, including a psychological test. And he was classified a psychopath. And for those of you who don't know what a psychopath is, it's a person who has absolutely no empathy, doesn't care. And as an example, when I was talking to Julia before the show started, he can shoot you, your family, strangle the dog, whatever vile act and violence he can commit, and go out and have dinner with his friends and laugh it up. No feelings whatsoever. And that's the way he was born. He liked to tell people that he was born in Italy, but he wasn't. He was born in East Harlem. And just to give you the lay of the land, there's an East Harlem, there's a West Harlem. And everybody that doesn't know the cities likes to categorize them as all one Harlem, just one's on the east side and one is the west side. But it was divided ethnically. West Harlem on the west side of Manhattan was inhabited by African Americans. It was about the same. It was small. It was larger than the east side of Manhattan version of it. On the east side was a big Italian enclave, and it was since the end of the 1800s. And when it started to be shared with the Hispanic community, it was always known from there on in as Spanish Harlem. You never heard it referred to as Italian Harlem, but it was run basically by the Italians on 116th Street was the main thoroughfare.
Specifically the Genovese family. That was one of the major crime families of New York City, New York State.
Into this area comes Carmine Galante. He's born at the turn of the century. He just automatically, he had no, if you live in that area of Harlem, you're around gangsters all the time. But when you're young, when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, you see these guys, you know who they are, they're part of your culture. But he had it ingrained in him. He just wanted to be a violent criminal. That's all he wanted to be. So at 15 years old, he does his first stint in jail. This is what he first got caught at. Prior to that, he used to enjoy beating people up. And a lot of it, I think, had to do with his stature. As a lot of small men do, they want to broadcast the fact that they're more than their lack of height. But with Galante, it was by hurting people. So he graduated from fights to his first stint in jail was for petty larceny and assault, which at the following year, when he was 16, he got arrested again. He did his first stint for armed robbery. So he went to Sing Sing for 3 years at a very young age. And he started his cigar habit as a teenager. And that's how he got his nickname, Lilo, Lilo, which means cigar in Italian. One of his first crimes out of prison was to continue his armed robberies. But he had a beef with a local beat cop. His name was Di Castilla. And he was just a foot patrolman. But Castilla used to push Galante around because he could. Not saying who's right, who's wrong here, but you can't take it out on a cop in front of witnesses. But Galante never forgot how this cop embarrassed him. So one of Galante's first armed robberies was of a shoe company. Back then, you got paid in cash if you worked for a company. Payday, these companies had lots of cash depending on how many employees they had. And people would come to get the money. Later on, that got changed to checks. There was no such thing as direct deposit. You had to take the check and go somewhere to cash it. But at this time, it's in the early 1930s. And the reason this date is important, I'll explain it in a couple of minutes, but he gets his crew together. This guy's a young man. He's a teenager. He gets his crew together to rob this shoe manufacturing company. And they were taking their time. And, Galante was the boss, despite his young age and his physicality, his height and all that. People were afraid of him back then. The cop who's been pushing him around, the shoe company happened to be on his post, what a lot of people call a beat. When you are on the foot patrol in the precinct where you work, that's your steady post every day. That's your steady beat. And as you'll see, Gigante picked that shoe company because it was this cop Di Castillo's post. So they go in there, they gather up all the money. It was $7,000. But Galante had something else in mind. He was waiting for the beat cop, Castillo, to respond to the alarm. And Castillo walks in the door and Galante executes him. Leaves the money, tells his people to leave the money, and they took off.
Sending a message.
Sending a message. But what kind of a mind as a teenager, killing cops back then was a death sentence. And it's not that you got caught, convicted, and executed somewhere in prison. The cops executed you. And this went on for a long time. I would say up until the late 60s, 70s. You killed a cop, your number was up. He didn't care. However, no one was talking for obvious reasons.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the guy, as you pointed out, he's certified psychopath. Like, he has no conscience. He has no rules. He plays his own rules.
I know, but didn't he think in the back of his head, I just killed a cop. So my only the only way I can save myself here is to tell everybody to keep their mouths shut. Now, you try that today.
Well, today you couldn't even do it. People were taking pictures while you're shooting the cop.
Well, not only that, but
everybody has cameras.
Yeah, but one of your crew gets a traffic ticket for going through a light, and they flip. I mean, everybody flips.
But when you have the fear of death, there's been a couple of bosses that we all know through the history of the mob. You never talk about them because they will go after you and your kids and everybody else. And we know many of them that we spoke about on the show. And he was the one guy and the way I met him earlier, the one guy that liked him, and he respected him also. Carmine respected Frank Costello. Frank Costello saved his life a long time. And as we get into your story, you're going to find out that Frank Costello had to okay killing him. Did you know that?
Just him?
Yep.
Well, there was, we don't want to get ahead of the story, but to respond to what you just said, people were leery of trying to whack this guy because if they screwed it up, he would have killed everybody.
Yeah, but, okay, I mean.
So they went to Costello, who made a decision.
That it had to come down from him because at that time he was still running things.
Yeah, but
and that was it. So, but I mean, there was a lot of people. Well, listen, when they made the hit on Albert Anastasia, everybody was petrified of this guy. He'd just rather than look at you. So, I mean, there are a lot of these guys that came through. But today we're talking about Carmine Galante, but. This guy's alive today. Yeah, I will talk about
the era produced these kind of people,
right?
They wanted power and they would do anything to get that power. So Carmine, fresh off killing a cop, and like you said, he told his crew, keep your mouth shut. But the word gets out. But there was going to be no one that was going to testify against him. Everybody knew who killed this cop, but. To this day, it remains, and I'm using air quotes here, it's unsolved.
Right.
But fresh off the cop killing, he decides that they're going to stick up a brewery. That's where the money is. It was a payday, same thing as like in the shoe company. They steal $4,000. This time they take the money. And while they're leaving, there's a truck out there, a beer truck, and they decide that they're thirsty. So they're going to break into the beer truck. After committing an armed robbery, they break into the beer truck to have some beer, to drink it. And that's obviously very sloppy.
Hopefully it was cold.
Yeah. I mean, who does that? You just stuck up a place and now you're going to have a couple of beers to celebrate. You do that in the next borough. You don't do it in front of the place. The company owned the beer truck. Anyway, they were taking their sweet time. And a detective named Joe Minahan spots them, and the crooks decide to make a run for it. And they started to run, but Galante, and this is why I mentioned how old he was. It was in the early 1930s. He screams at the cop, "Eat lead, copper!" I mean, James Cagney just made a movie called Public Enemy. James Cagney, for those of you who don't know who he is, he made, for at least the 1930s and early 40s, made a career out of playing gangsters, tough guys.
Great actor.
He's a great actor. He's about Lilo's size, and Lilo takes one of his lines from Public Enemy when Cagney got in the shootout and said, "Eat lead, copper." Now Galante's saying it, and he starts shooting it out with this detective. Some 6-year-old kid gets caught in the crossfire, and gets hit in the leg. The detective was shot 5 times.
Did he die?
No, he lived. You're old enough to remember this, John. You remember those overcoats? In fact, I had one.
Oh, yeah.
The overcoats that cops wore in the winter were called horse blankets.
Yeah.
They were so friggin' heavy.
And they wrapped around you. It was like double-breasted. So you had
they were huge, and they were very heavy, and they were very thick.
Right.
But they kept you warm. Because those were the days when there weren't many radio cars out there. Most cops worked on foot. Yeah. Anyway, the coat stopped the bullets, at least slowed them down. So it was assumed they weren't using, they were getting guns off the street, 32s, 38s. There was no such thing as a 9mm, at least we didn't have in this country at the time. That's a round.
Well, I was shot 14 years ago. If I didn't have my fur coat on.
There you go. Your story. Yeah.
You remember?
Tell us that.
Yeah. That was it. I had a chinchilla coat on. It was November 22nd. And the doorbell rang. They said it was DHL. And I was getting my vodka and different things from DHL from Italy for me to test at the time. I didn't approve it yet. And shot me close range with 38s. And fortunately, I was only 6 blocks from New York Presbyterian Hospital. But if it wasn't for that coat, I would have bled out.
How many times were you hit?
6 times. They did a gun on me. Perforated all my large intestines and small intestines, all of my groin area and my stomach.
Wow. I mean, and you're right. The coat saved your life.
Oh, the coat saved my life. And not only that, not to divert from the story, the fact when Dr. Tiwari, they removed the bullets, and he was the guy who created the prostrate robotic surgery and went in and damaged nothing in my just removed the bullets. Yeah. Another doctor would have went in, I would be a basket case. I'd rather die. But I tell you, what they discovered though, that why is the left side of my body different than the right side? And long story short, that's why I'm on a stem cell program governed by the government. They're using my right side stems to build my left side. And now my same shoe size fit. I used to wear a different shoe on my left and my right.
So what you're saying is you're in a government pilot project with these stem cells?
Of course.
And this costs you a grand total of what?
Nothing.
That's what I knew.
No, normally it would be $35,000, my original treatments.
I tell you, you were saved for a reason, and I assume it wasn't to be on this podcast. But I mean, you're very lucky.
My whole life story is that, everything that's negative turns to positive for me, fortunately.
I don't suppose you want to get into who shot you.
No. Let's go on with Galante.
Okay, let's get on with the cop that was shot 5 times. 4 bullets were stopped by this guy's overcoat. And this coat has been known to stop a lot of rounds. This guy just wasn't lucky. So 4 rounds were stopped. 1 round hit him in the leg. And the only thing I can think of was that the flap of the coat flapped open. He got hit in the leg. This didn't stop this Minahan, this detective, from chasing Galante. And what kind of shape do you have to be in where a cop you just shot in the leg catches you?
Well, that's how fat Galante was. He couldn't run.
Yeah, exactly. And he did. This time he returns to Sing Sing, where he was well known. 12 and a half years.
Whoa.
Clearly, armed robbery is not this guy's forte.
Hello.
Sir, was he just not very smart? He doesn't seem like a very smart.
No, he's a bully.
Yeah, he wasn't. I mean, You
He
can call him,
wasn't calculated. He'd sit on these armed robberies and that's what he knew.
yeah, how to steal. That's all he knew. When you say intelligence, he was extremely street smart, not book smart. And you find that in a lot of these guys, they just never go to school, but they survive on the streets out of guile and wit, and they just
and brawn and fear.
Well, obviously, that's what this guy did.
Yeah.
Only when you see him for the first time, perhaps people didn't think that this guy was who he was, and he didn't care who you were, how big you were, how tall you were. He'd fight you, and most of the time win. He was just an animal. So, but even animals have their soft side. He had two, and I use the term loosely, wives. He had children with both, but he was legally married once. His wife's name was Helen. Johnny, you know the area probably better than I do when it comes to churches. Our Lady of Sorrows. Do you know where that is downtown?
No, I don't. Is that in the Bronx?
No, it's in Manhattan.
In Manhattan? No.
Yes, it's in the Little Italy section. They said, but then
Our
again,
Lady of Sorrows. That's a Lady Queen of Peace. That's down there. That was my parish for a long time.
Oh, that's a long time ago. Anyway, his mistress, he spent 20 years with her. Her name was Anna Aquavella. And I'm reading this and I said, boy, did she invent the aftershave? But that's Aquavella, right? Okay, I had that confused. All right. So he's released. So anyway, Julia, what do you think? It's just a typical guy that you'd meet on the street. He might see you, he might like you, might ask you for a date. And who knows, one day you'd be Mrs. Carmine Galante or somebody similar. Because he did have a soft side. Now, these guys don't act tough when they want something.
Oh, they're very charming.
Yeah.
Women. Most of these guys of that type are that way. They're very charming. You don't even know. But it's when they turn, and they could turn on a dime.
A psychopath I think we can all relate to was Ted Bundy, who was an infamous serial killer. They had on something like 29 killings, but he killed a lot more women. He only killed young college-age women. And he killed a lot more than 29. In fact, he tried to save his life when he finally got caught. There's something you can never understand, though. He went out of his way to go from Bellingham, Washington to Florida as a fugitive and killed two women in a sorority house. Florida has the death penalty. I mean, he didn't plan this at all. He goes in there with a tree limb and beat them to death. But anyway, he was caught and executed. As he was about to get executed, 2 days out, he said, I will tell you where the rest of the bodies are if you spare me, if you don't give me the death penalty. They thought about it, but they said, well, you're going to take it to your grave then. But we're getting off track here. The point is, Ted Bundy was a charmer and a very good looking guy. He had a girlfriend for many, many years who had no idea what he was doing, what his hobby was, so to speak. But you can go on, those of you who've never seen this guy, go on YouTube, and there was cameras allowed in his Florida trial. And this guy looks like a movie star. I can't describe him any other way. Had a very engaging smile. He had so many women that wanted to marry him, even when he was in prison. He was just he was a charmer. Like Johnny said, these people can charm when they want something. And when he wanted to get close to you, Bundy would put the charm on, and using his looks, which Galante obviously did not have, he would get any woman he wanted.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's all. I was just going to say, you can definitely tell that he was a charmer. I mean, there was the Ted Bundy tapes, which was released on Netflix, documenting like Ted Bundy's life, and he was played by Zac Efron. So yeah, definitely he would have had to have been a good looker if he was played by Zac Efron.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And you could just, for 20 more seconds on Ted. He had the same approach. He had his arm in a cast, and he would have a van type vehicle, and he would go to a beach, a park, and he would be trying to struggle to get furniture into this van with one arm. And sure enough, some woman would approach him because of the way he looked neat and clean, good looking, and ask if they could help get this piece of furniture. It was usually a couch. And he would say, okay, step into the van and I'll just push it to you. And he pushed it in, then he jumped in the van, slammed the doors, and they were dead. Now, when he was being pursued by the police, this system of getting his victims was broadcast, and he continued to get them using the same ploy. Anyway.
What year was that? I think that has a lot to do. What year was that, Bundy?
Bundy was from the 70s through the 80s.
Yeah, see, that would never happen today with all the telecasting of.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't happen today with social media. No,
social media would get this guy.
There'd be some idiot that would make a Ted Bundy fan club, but his picture would be plastered all over the place.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
Time changed. So he gets out of prison after this 12-and-a-half-year bit, 1939. He decided he needed steadier work. Armed robbery apparently was not for him. He became a hitman for Vito Genovese. I mean, what do you do to apply for that job? But anyway, he liked to kill. And although authors who've written about Galante say that the number of his victims are unaccountable, the NYPD linked him to 80 murders. That's just the ones they linked him to.
Right. See, that's when he got close to Costello. Costello liked him and was trying to,
Really?
Yeah, really. Well, figure it out. Vito Genovese and Costello. Hello.
Not the best of friends. But, people that aren't aware of it, we brought this up in the past. Hitmen that are in the mob, they don't get paid for this. They're just ordered to whack this guy, whack that guy. They don't get paid.
No.
A guy like Galante would enjoy this, and I actually see him volunteering for the work. But that's getting paid. The hitman that charges $1,000 for a hit for the mob. That's all a fairy tale.
Yeah. No, to them it was a privilege to do the work, especially
exactly. You for your first hit that may get you made, get your button, so to speak. After that, you had to really like the work, unless you got assigned to it, you had to do it. And usually the work you got assigned to was killing your best friend. No. Because you were the person that could easily approach this person because he was your friend and would not expect to die at the hands of his friend. So that's
why, we even wrote about that in Sixth Family.
Yeah.
When, if it wasn't Frank Collada, they would have never came to Chicago. We're talking about the Spilatros, and they made them feel comfortable. But that was the whole tradition. And this is going to sound very strange to you because I used to go down after church at Precious Blood and go to the Ravenite just to pay my respects to the old man. And anybody, I learned this later on in life. I was in my teens. Well, you weren't allowed in the Ravenite before 12 if you weren't a made man.
This is midnight.
Excuse me?
12 what? Noon or midnight?
12 noon on Sundays. Yeah. That's when after church on Sundays, they'd go to church and go back up there and everybody that was a maid guy had a problem. Their meeting was set up for them to come and discuss what their problems were from the other boroughs. Then the other guys were outside. So those guys were the guys waiting to get an assignment to do a hit to try to earn their button. I mean,
it takes, you got to rationalize this because all these guys aren't crazy, so you have to rationalize this, that they're soldiers. This is a war and you're assigned to kill the enemy. That's how rationalize the mentality.
That's the mentality. And I sat there. The point I was trying to mention, the old man, meaning Gambino and O'Neill, without me getting that education, I probably wanted to get a button. I would have been easily lured by 16 to 17 to be a guy.
I can see that. I mean, from that neighborhood. I mean, I'm from that neighborhood. You're either going to go one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I can see the allure. These guys dress well. They have all the women they want. Nice
They
cars.
never went to work. The
Yeah,
biggest thing, they didn't go to work.
But when you and I used to see them, they were like prancing around the neighborhood. They weren't doing the crap they had to do in life. The murder, and I mean, it's just, I don't know how these guys live with themselves, even though if they're trying to rationalize. Right. But Galante killed one person. His name was Carlo Tresca. This was a famous hit. He was a journalist, labor leader, a committed anarchist who spoke out in this was in this country. He spoke out against Stalin and Hitler. And this was starting at the start of the war. This was in the early 40s. Even though he was an Italian immigrant, he hated Mussolini. And at any chance he got an audience. He was very well known in this country as a labor leader. Unfortunately, Mussolini's one of his very tight friends was Vito Genovese.
Hello.
And Mussolini picked up a phone or whatever he did in 1943 and said to Vito, "This guy's got to go." And Galante, one night on the corner of Fifth Avenue and 15th Street, and I mean, I could picture the neighborhood now, which is very crowded, the high-end apartment buildings, Union Square's right there. He just walked right up to him and shot him in the back of the head. Doesn't care about witnesses, doesn't care about anybody. And down he went. And then, in history books, this assassination is still talked about because they assumed that Mussolini was behind it. And if you were a cop on the job at the time, you knew who did the hit. But who's going to talk about it?
No, I mean, that's what he had going. And I mean, he had such a respect from the higher anarchy of the mob and the syndicate, because he'd do any hit you wanted. He didn't care.
Obviously, the hit is just, high profile hits are very dangerous. Not for the fact that, you're going to get hurt doing the hit, but they go all out trying to find out who did it, And,
well, you picked on two subjects that is definitely taboo. You don't shoot a cop and you don't shoot a journalist. It's an unwritten law. Unwritten law.
Double header.
I mean, if you're in any of the families, even in Chicago anyway, it's an unwritten law. Stay away from police and journalists.
In fact, all these years, through the 20s, prohibition, again, whacked left and right, and the subsequent years up until today, one journalist has been killed. Jake Lingle, his name was. He worked for Chicago newspaper, and he was owned by the mob. Yep. This got me $46 a week, literally. And he owned homes, he owns cars, he had money in the bank. He stepped on somebody's toes. To this day, they don't really know who ordered it, but he's the only reporter in American history to get killed. That said, Lilo walks up behind Tresca calmly, puts the gun, it was a contact shot, right to his head, shoots him, turns around, and calmly walks away. A bunch of witnesses saw him do it. A bunch of witnesses saw the getaway car, which they found abandoned a couple blocks away. They even got the plate of the car. The car was stolen. And they saw, they had witnesses putting Galante getting into the car before the hit. Still nothing.
So with, say, like this murder sort of, I guess, being categorized as a sloppy killing, how did he still have so much respect from, the higher ups?
Because he got the job done. They don't care how you did it.
Oh, okay.
And they don't care if he was taken out. He didn't have to be creative. They just wanted the guy dead. Yeah. How you did it's your problem. If you got caught, it's your problem.
You could figure if they would have hired, if there was such a thing back then, as a professional killer, it would have taken weeks, if not months, to plot this guy's schedule, where he goes, where you're going to shoot him, where there won't be any witnesses, plot your getaway. Lilo says he gets the job on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Tresca's dead.
Okay.
That's just the kind of guy he was. So anyway, the crime was never solved. And by the 1950s, Galante, by virtue, if you can use the word, of that hit, became somebody to be reckoned with. So he becomes the consigliere to Joseph Bonanno, of the Bonanno crime family. He was the namesake of the Bonanno crime family. Interestingly enough, and maybe you can explain this, Johnny. Bonanno writes a book, or the book was about him, and it was a bestseller called Man of Honor,
Right.
about his life. Galante worked with Bonanno for years. He's not mentioned once in this book.
That's
Why?
the fear they had. Hello. And Bill, his son, who okayed the book, Bill Bonanno,
Yeah.
he knew Carmine very well.
Uh,
And if you want your tongue cut out and stick somewhere else, he knew he would do it. And that's why nobody mentioned his name.
I didn't know whether they had a falling out, or he's just said, the wise move is not to mention this guy's name.
That's
Yeah.
it. Nobody did. No, nobody did if you want to stay alive. That's the whole situation. And that's what gained his respect through so many people. I mean, he could overhear that you don't like somebody. And he'd come to you the next day and said, that guy you were talking about last night? Don't worry about him. He's not around no more.
Yeah, he's gone.
He just did you a favor. Like, he took him for a ride. He's done.
Okay, at that happy note, what do you say we do a commercial?
Please, we need the money.
Yes, we do.
We'll be right back. Thank you.
We are pleased to announce the publication of a new book series from Gianni Russo and Patrick Piccarelli entitled The Sixth Family. When the alleged daughter of Marilyn Monroe asks for help, Gianni Russo becomes entangled in a web of lies and violence in the search for the late actress's diary. Soon, he is enmeshed in a mystery that involves a presidential candidate, a disgruntled Mafia capo, a retired NYPD detective, and the past of Mafia boss Frank Costello. Russo must race against the clock to stop a hostile reorganization of the American Mafia, while trying to stay one step ahead of a faceless killer. While listening to this book, skillfully read by Gianni himself, the listener will have to determine what is true and what is fiction. Or as Gianni says before this epic story begins, this book is a work of fiction, except for the parts that are true. Look out for the second installment of this exciting new series coming in 2023, The Sixth Family. Book 1 is available now on Amazon.com.
All right, we're back. And we want to ask a millennium who knows nothing about crime, came from another country, who has low crime or no crime. What are you thinking about all this, Julia? This is an education for you and our young audiences.
Yeah, 100%. I sort of have a question going back a little bit. We were sort of talking about how, with Ted Bundy, obviously he had a girlfriend that didn't know. With the wives and obviously the mistresses of Galante and other, people in the mob, how much did their wives know? Obviously, he was in and out of jail, so they would have known, to some extent. But was it very often that, say, the wives of mobsters knew exactly what they did, or were they just in the dark completely, or?
What I've learned to know personally is that they just turned another eye. If he was paying their rent and they had kids, they didn't upset the apple cart. That's just the way of life. I got friends who are still married and their wives come to their funerals and cry, and their girlfriends are sitting 3 rows back.
There was a system here. Well, first of all, the wives, this was part of the culture, for one. And two, there's a lot of money coming in. And, they liked the lifestyle just as long as hubby came home. And generally the rule was Friday night for the girlfriend, Saturday night for the wives.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the way it went.
It's so funny you brought that up. At the Copacabana, I was 16, 17. And I'm talking to Carmine. And I said, that ain't that guy's wife. He said, Johnny, it's Friday night. So what does that mean? No, Friday night, they take their girlfriends here. And then Saturday night, they come back with their wives.
Yeah. Same place, same table, same waiters.
Same everything.
Hey, long time no see,
And so, it's the lifestyle. And that's another reason I think guys get lured into it. because it's basically an excuse to be a bigamist, even.
Yeah, but there were a few wise guys who didn't toe that line. They didn't cheat. They didn't have girlfriends. They just believed in the mob, and they didn't want to bother. I personally don't know of any. Do you?
Yeah, Carlo Gambino never had a girlfriend. Frank Costello never had a girlfriend. They had lady friends, but they never took them to bed. They liked the charm of them, but they never crossed over. The old timers, those guys I know. I mean, then there's other guys that in that same age group had girlfriends.
Did they
O'Neill
believe?
had a girlfriend.
Did they believe in the institution of marriage, or they just figured one day I'm going to have a girlfriend and she's going to bite me in the ass and I'm going to prison?
No, but you take a guy. I mean, let's look at use a figure if anybody knows what Carlo Gambino looks like. Women ain't chasing him down the block because of his looks.
Yeah.
So
Costello?
Yeah, but Costello had an air about him. You couldn't approach him, number one, anyway. People walk up to the street, there's two people grabbing you away from him. He had people around him all the time. And he didn't welcome it. If 6 women walked up to him, he would just not push them aside, but casually walk away. He wasn't, like for instance, that our audience may be able to compare to. John Gotti loved it. People would jump up and hug him and kiss him. I was in clubs where women left their husbands to come and sit with him because he called them up with a wave.
Yeah, I heard that.
And that's the disrespect of these women.
And they go.
Husband, and they come over. Well, hon, what do you want me to do? He called me over. I mean, what do you want me to do? Are you nuts or what?
I always thought that maybe John Gotti was a friggin' triplet or quadruplet. Wherever I went on the East Side, he was there.
Oh no, he was out every night, man.
Every single night, the best restaurants.
3 or 4 places.
Yeah, I mean.
And then they'd wind up in Regimes, which is the hottest club at the time when he was going. In fact, people would go there just to see him. It was like he was the attraction in the nightclub. And they would send bottles of Cristal over, which that was his drink. And when he closed, there was so many bottles of Cristal that had his name down on it, JG, that was his cases of them.
Yeah.
But he made the club pick up the money. They never said, don't send the bottle. But that's who he was. And he loved it. And people would show up to send him a bottle and just nod their head. And, I was with John last night. He was with John. He was across the room. I bought him a bottle of champagne and drink.
I used to go to a restaurant who's a couple of storefronts away from Dangerfield's place. Il Caminetto. Do you remember it, John?
Oh, yeah. Hold on. That was a heavy.
I was there. I'd always go on a Saturday night with a date. I was a single guy. 2 to 3 times a month. And I'm hard-pressed to think of a Saturday night when this guy didn't at least stop into the bar with his entourage, Gotti.
Always.
He knew
it was a hot place, and if there's any women, he's gonna pick them up.
That was his launching point.
Yep.
Then they leave there and they go up Second Avenue and hit all the bars. But anyway, back to our friend Carmine. This was about the time when there was a connection made with Italy with heroin, and it was dangerous to get involved with heroin. The bosses didn't want you to be involved unless they got a piece, and a little wink and give me the money under the table thing. But still, the feds had an eye on it, and that's what you had to worry about. Carmine Galante wanted to get involved in this because he was Carmine Galante. He wanted to be the first kid in the block to be the king of heroin, therefore gain the power, the money, and he was happy to do it. He didn't care about going to jail.
Well, he had a great connection through the Bonannos. The Bonannos had a heroin connection in Sicily. Nobody had.
They try to put wiretaps on Galante's phones. The only problem is they never knew where he was. He had a family downtown with his wife, and then it was his girlfriend, who I called Aquabelba, in Midtown. He also had a family in New Jersey with a woman. They had kids. They never knew where this guy was, so they couldn't get him on a wire. but he was finally indicted in 1958 on heroin charges. Coincidentally, there was it was delayed by a mistrial because the jury foreman, talk about luck. The jury foreman had a near fatal fall down a flight of stairs. Now, what are the odds?
Yeah.
You know, in an abandoned building, nobody lived there. And he fell down a flight of stairs. This guy was an elderly man. And I asked you, what's an old guy doing walking around an abandoned building in the middle of the night? He said he just went out for a walk and he just had an urge to go to the top floor when they threw him down the stairs. He lived, but there was a mistrial. But by 1962, I guess they started to have anonymous juries. He was convicted on a conspiracy to evade narcotics laws. Received 20 years, didn't blink, did the time, and he made himself at home in prison. He took up the game of handball. Handball, for those of you who don't know, is a New York game, primarily. And there's a lot of hustlers in it. Every schoolyard, every playground in the city, which is all concrete, had handball courts. And these people used to play for big money. And
you know why handball was a big thing in New York, in the Lower East Side, and for families?
What is that?
They couldn't afford tennis rackets.
That makes sense.
And that's the truth.
You literally hit, and this was a hard rubber ball. You didn't, I mean, I played handball, but to learn the game, you couldn't actually swat the ball with your hand. It had to sort of roll off your hand. You would hurt yourself. This was a hard, small rubber ball. And if you try to hit it like you would swat a fly, you'd be bone bruised. It hurt. Anyway, Galante, as any other kid that was brought up on the East Side, knew the game somewhat. Of course, Galante had other things to do. He was busy killing people. Winds up in jail, decides he's going to be the king of handball in whatever prison he was in. And but he set down the rules. Whoever he played, he says, I am to win all the games.
Yeah, and that's it.
And that's it. When one opponent, I guess a guy that just arrived, who maybe was Irish, didn't know how this guy operated, he disobeyed the rule, beat him, and Galante walked up to him, slapped him in the face, and says, I rule everything. And when I get out of prison, I will show this to everyone. That was the quote. Needless to say, the guy never beat him in handball again.
So while he was in jail, who, if you guys know, would have been looking after things for him on his end outside of prison? Like, did
it's inside of prison? Julia, those guys, when they went to jail, they had people that cook for them, people to do their errands for them. He could order what he wanted. The guards would bring it into him. John Gotti was known to have a phone for 2 hours every night and talk to anybody he wanted. It was a guard's phone. They run the prisons, and outside, the family's still running their families there out of fear. Their envelopes still came on Sunday. Their wives still got their money. That's what we were talking about before. The real wives got the money to the family, and then if they respected the Gumaris, they got an envelope too. So why not be around these guys?
Now, just to show you the let's call it the gall, because there's a lady present on Carmine. He gets out of jail in 1972, and all this time he was in it, 20 years, he did every day of it. He's plotting to be the boss of bosses. He wants to take over, period, and nobody's going to stand in his way. So he goes to the Bonanno family. By this time, the boss was Phil Rastelli, and just said, I'm the boss. Rastelli, who was the boss, really didn't say anything, like it didn't even happen. So Galante is running the Bonanno family. Rastelli is running the same family, and Rastelli was afraid of him. Now, Rastelli had a problem. Rastelli got involved in a shootout with his arch enemy, his wife.
Whoa.
Over the breakfast table. They're trading rounds. Yeah, his wife, I mean, they ought to write a book about her. She was a winner. She got pissed off at something, forgot to take out the garbage, whatever it was. She pulls out a gun. He pulls out his gun, and they start trading shots. So,
How did they live? There must be bad aim.
Very carefully.
Across the breakfast table. I wouldn't come home again. Forget about it.
Cheerios went flying. I mean, it was. But anyway, something like this happens. You're viewed as weak. Do you think it's possible? I mean, he gets in a gun battle with his wife. Anyway, he was still the boss, though, because once you're the boss, it's kind of hard to get deposed, even though you show weakness. Other people may want to take you out. There's a whole bunch of protocol that's got to be followed to take out a boss. Things aren't running smoothly when you have two bosses. The Bonanno family was in turmoil. Do you know you know a little about that at that time, Gianni?
Well, yeah, they exiled him to us.
Joe Bonanno's gone.
Yeah, he's gone, and he's trying to run it from there. So the street boss is running it up here, and they were constant at odds.
So they got three bosses trying to run a family,
right? Which
leads to I would imagine lots of conflict.
No, but to see who is making all the money, and they didn't care, basically, because the street kids were selling the heroin, making a ton of money under their umbrella. Talk about unorganized or disorganized crime.
So by the late 1970s, Galante he organized the murders of 8 members of the Gambino family. We had a rivalry going on because of fighting over heroin territory. He was on parole by 1978. Galante's parole was revoked for allegedly associating with Bonanno mobsters, and he's sent back to prison. However, in 1979, a judge ruled that the government illegally revoked Galante's parole. I wonder what passed through it. How do you revoke parole? When you're on parole, you cannot consort with known criminals, which means everybody he was dealing with was a criminal. How do you say, whoops, the government made a mistake? Was this a federal crime that he got locked up for? They said, no, he didn't do anything wrong, and they let him go. And now the war is basically on, and this is when he starts bumping heads with Costello. They were longtime rivals, but now time is marching on here. Carmine Galante isn't getting any younger. And by that time, Costello dies, 1973, Gianni, or 72?
Yeah.
Okay.
73.
Galante, just goes to show you what a nut this guy was. He planted a bomb at Costello's mausoleum in Queens, St. John's Cemetery. It's right where I lived.
As revenge, just to show disrespect.
The guy's dead. And this wasn't the first time. Every year, a bomb would go off for about 3 successive years. And it was Galante. What's he trying to prove here?
No, he was just, like you said, he was a psychopath.
Okay, so now Galante moved very quickly because, like I said, time's wasting. He becomes everything from pornography to mozzarella cheese. He had the corner on importation of mozzarella in this country. You wanted pizza, you had
to buy it through his people.
Yeah, you had to buy it through Galante. You want to see a pornographic movie? There was no internet back then. All of the pornography movie theaters were on 42nd Street between Broadway and 8th. You couldn't walk down that street.
Oh, that street, long before Giuliani cleaned that up.
Oh, yeah. But Giuliani,
that street was just, you walk down that street during those times, Julia, they had girls in garter belts on the sidewalk. You would think you're in the Reaper bomb in Germany.
Oh, my God.
42nd Street is known as the crossroads of the world, and it's the most trafficked street. There had to be 8 or 9 movie theaters on each side of the block. This is one block. Now, I was working on 42nd Street with the Tactical Patrol Force. We were sent there to clean it up. Are you kidding me? I mean, it was virtually impossible to do without an act of God, or the government had to move in, which they eventually did. But just to show you how crowded it was, at TPF, we worked in pairs on foot. So on one side of the street, there's 4 pairs of cops. So there's 8 cops on one side of the street, 8 cops on the other side of the street. If I was to look left or right, I could not see the other teams on the block. I was able to see across the street. But if I needed help, or my partner and I needed help, which we did on occasion, because once you make an arrest, people are literally shoulder to shoulder, literally. And you try to put handcuffs on somebody, you're in a fight for your life. The cop, the other team could be maybe 100 feet away. They don't know what the hell's going on. That's where the porn theaters were, and he was raking it in.
Yeah.
He was the king of porn, and soon he wanted to be the boss of bosses. But they had to get rid of this guy. He was bringing media attention. He was killing his own people. So they put out a contract on him, and they got to be careful, because if he would have survived, there would have been hell to pay. He would have killed everybody, whether you were involved or not. This is basically his brazen attempt to corner the market on heroin. Everybody was involved. So Costello, did Costello have to go to the other four families for sanctions? I guess he had to, right?
Well, they wanted it. Number one, they all voted for it. So
I'm sure that was 100% no problem vote on the first ballot, so to speak.
Right. Hello.
So, okay, July 12th, 1979. Now, coincidentally, that's my birthday, not 1979. July 12th is my birthday. And I lived in Queens, and I was at a friend's house on the Brooklyn-Queens border.
Costello was already dead in 79.
Yeah. Costello's already gone.
Yeah.
But Galante is trying to flex too much, and he's really aggravating a lot of people. So he had to go. There was a restaurant on Bushwick Avenue, in the Bushwick sections on Knickerbocker Avenue, 205 Knickerbocker. I passed it numerous times. Joe and Mary's Italian Restaurant. This was a mom and pop restaurant. And when you walked
for it, it was known for it. It was crazy.
Yeah. But when you walked in, it was very narrow. And when you walked in, I mean, you can smell the place throughout the neighborhood. It was, really rich Italian sauces. It was the place to go. Checker tablecloths. In the back, there was a yard, fenced in, and if you wanted some privacy, which Galante did,
and you could smoke a cigar out there.
And he could smoke a cigar, even though he could smoke anywhere he wanted. But I guess he also wanted a little privacy. So he's got a couple of people with him. Leonard Coppola was a Bonanno capo and a staunch Gigante loyalist. The restaurant owner / cousin, Giuseppe Turano, was a Bonanno soldier. Also sitting at Galante's table were his two bodyguards who had a lot to say in Galante's demise. One of them, Cesare Bonaventri, was his picture was taken that day. He was a tall, lean guy, very handsome Italian guy. Once again, all the women started to, trying to reach out to this guy. And the other guy was Baldassare Amato. They were his bodyguards. Well, 2:45 p.m., three masked men entered the restaurant. Now, obviously, Galante gets assassinated, but there were two other people killed there that day, too. You don't hear about these guys. It was the two people that he was with. Three ski mask shooters come in, shotguns and handguns. They walk past other diners. The bar was on the left. The waiters, they just walk on through armed. You can't hide a shotgun. These weren't sawed-off shotguns. These were big weapons. And Galante, Turano, and Coppola were killed instantly. This was on 1010 Wins. 1010 Wins, if you don't live in New York, was the first 24-hour all-news station. And every 20 minutes, they would come on with different headlines.
Well, that's what made them such a popular thing.
Oh, yeah.
Anything that was going on in the city, you could find out in 10 minutes.
Where they got 1010 from, that was the designation on the dial, on the AM dial, was an AM station.
Yeah.
So I don't know, wherever I was with my friends, we heard this restaurant, Carmine Galante shot it. I have to see this, right? So it was it was a hot July day. It was my birthday. I'm with my friends. We all had a couple of beers in us. I wouldn't have done this if I was sober, but I decided I'm going to go there. Was I a lieutenant at the time? I was a sergeant. So I just wanted to see it. I had a morbid curiosity. I couldn't get anywhere near this place. They had the whole block roped off, but I was on the block anyway. Albert Seidman shows up. Albert Seidman was the chief of detectives. If you ever saw an old gangster movie and the chief of detectives was all the same type, burly guy, pork pie hat, always had a cigar in his mouth. The old-time chief of detectives. The detectives loved him. He was a great guy. This guy even had any bosses from sergeant up, their shields are gold, not real gold, but they're gold, some kind of gold medal or painted gold or whatever it is. Albert Seidman had a real gold chief of detectives, solid gold. Anyway, he hated Galante. All cops hated Galante. He walks in there. Now there's an iconic picture. You can go on the internet now and just go to Google, put Carmine Galante's death, and you'll see his picture. He's laying on his back. He's in an awkward position.
Perforated with bullets.
Yeah, this is what happens when you get hit with shotgun blasts. I mean, this is not a touched up photo. It's still out there. You can see it online. He's there. His arms were like hanging up like a marionette. He looked like he's got a cigar sticking out of his mouth because that was his trademark. I'm thinking this guy gets blown away with multiple shotguns. The first thing that's going to be ejected is that cigar. So the word was that when Albert Seidman showed up, the chief of detectives, was a big deal. He walks in there before any pictures were taken. He said, "Hold it." And he took out a cigar and stuck it in his mouth. Now he said, "You can take the picture."
That's what he was known for, Lilo. Hello.
Yeah. Mm. So the end result was the bodyguards, I don't know. People came in, they had guns, and they were gone. It all happened so quickly. The bodyguards set them up. There was nobody there to protect Galante. The bodyguards weren't chastised as the mafia will chastise you sometimes for not doing their job. He was buried. Galante was buried in Queens. His lawyer showed up, Roy Cohn, who was a mob lawyer
major lawyer out of Florida.
We should do a story on this guy. But anyway,
we're not. He's still alive. He's good friends of mine. He's still in Florida.
Cohn died of AIDS.
When?
25 years ago.
Oh no, I'm not talking about Roy Cohn. Who's there?
Yeah.
A black.
Oh, Roy Black, you're talking about? Yeah, no,
Roy
he's
Black,
in Miami.
Yeah.
Roy Cohn. Well, we'll talk about him some other time. But he was a mob lawyer. Anyway, Galante's legitimate wife and his daughter from his second family, who was just as crazy as her father was. What a nut. Anyway, her mother stayed out of the picture out of respect for the widow. A Catholic church refused a funeral mass. We did a show on this, by the way.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I mean, it had to be 2-3 years ago, about why some mobsters are allowed Catholic burial and others aren't. Mm-hmm. So if you want to go back and and find out why, most generally the criteria was if you maintained a low profile, you were okay.
And made contributions to the church.
I mean, we don't want to be cynical here, but a nice contribution helps. This guy, his family could have wheeled up a truck full of gold, and they wouldn't have buried him. They wouldn't have had a mass.
Well, the biggest thing about that was the amount of killings. There was no way they could even have in the church, on the steps, not even.
So they finally found a priest who probably was a gambler and in debt. Well, they found him with his pants down in some cat house to do the mass. He mumbled a couple of words, probably had a couple of drinks in him. And everybody said this is totally fitting for a guy, and that's the way he should go. No one wanted to be around him, even in death. His bodyguards, there's always somebody around to take care of you. Bonaventure was found murdered in a New Jersey warehouse in 1984, so many years after. And in 1987, Anthony Indelicato was sentenced to 40 years in prison as a defendant for the commission trial. And they said he's the one that organized the hit with the hitters and all that. Cesare Bonaventura, I couldn't find what happened to him, but I thought he was killed also, but I couldn't find anything about it. So he may be living the life, not in this country though. He probably went back to Sicily.
That was a great story. I mean,
yeah, but
a couple of people asked us to do it on it, but obviously it's a part of mob history. And
if I was
such a colorful guy, forget about it.
If I was a filmmaker, I'd want to do this guy's story on film.
Right. Well, we can get Pacino to play him, I guess.
Not the same age. Anyway, I'd like to say R.I.P. Carmine Galante, but he doesn't deserve those words. But that's it. That's it for the long life of Carmine Galante.
So, my darling, what's your synopsis of this show? I like watching your expressions as we talk, like she's watching a horror movie sometimes. Her face changes.
Carmine has a grandson that saw you, Julia, on a show. He wants to meet you. What do you say if I set you up with him?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Yes, I have.
If you ever change your mind or you have some friend you're angry at, just give this guy a call.
Fair enough.
He's a big Julia fan. But that's it. That's it, folks.
All right. Well, I think, and this was a result of a request, fortunately. Yeah. And so just keep sending in the requests. And we'll do anything in closing, Julia, you want to tell our fans and your fans now?
Yeah, well, no, it was just a very, very interesting topic of conversation, and especially for someone who lived majority of their life. I was going to say, after hearing you talk about it, he would have spent at least 30, 35 years in prison?
Didn't care.
Yeah, it blows my mind.
Part of the business.
Of life.
You know, there's a saying, no matter how long the sentence is, the 20 years I can do it standing on my head. That's what these guys used to say.
That's what they used to do.
Part of doing business. Okay, folks. Well, I bid you and Johnny and Julia a good evening.
Perfect. And to our audience, we'll see you on the radio.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
And that was that. And I'll be back.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hollywood Godfather podcast. Want to ask us a question for the mailbag? We love hearing from our fans, so submit your questions online at hollywoodgodfatherpodcast.com, or you can give us a call at 646-776-3038 and leave a message. Contact us anytime with your questions about past or future shows, your favorite celebrity, or anything you'd like to know, and who knows, your question may even make it on the air. Remember to follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at Hollywood Godfather and at Real Johnny Russo. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review with your podcast provider or your video streaming service. We'll be back next week with another exciting show, and who knows who we may have on the show. If you don't want to miss out on an episode, remember to subscribe. Until next time.
My life's like scenes out of a movie. I'm the Hollywood Godfather, truly. I got stories with them all. You know, celebrities, world leaders, icons. Who knows what's next for me? I'll never get too old to have a little fun. Come on, I'm Gianni Russo, a genuine one of a kind. What a ride it's been, this life of mine. And I ain't done yet. I'll be back. Until next time.
And that was that.
When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green when I was 17. I didn't mind waiting